A roadside flower seller has no right to stand in the way of a project worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Charles Whitman spoke loudly enough for every vendor at Riverside Market to hear. He snatched the complaint form from Emily Parker's hand, crushed it into a bowl, and threw it into a puddle in front of her flower stand. On the wooden post behind him was a notice ordering her to leave within 70 hours, even though the hearing over land use rights had not yet taken place. Emily stood in the rain, her brown hair soaked and clinging to her cheeks. She pointed at the date on the notice. The enforcement date comes before the hearing. You do not have the legal right to remove us yet. Charles straightened his cuff. The polite expression disappeared from his face as he looked at the woman in the faded raincoat. You signed an agreement accepting compensation. This project cannot wait for a flower stand that makes a few $100s a week. He never signed anything. The signature in the file says otherwise. Charles signaled to high employees. One of them pushed the wooden table aside to post another notice. The table leg caught on the top. Knocking over the flower crates Emily had prepared for delivery to the hospital. White roses, carnations, and bundles of lavender fell into the dirty rainwater running along the walkway. "Mom!" Noah rushed out from beneath the shelter and dropped to his knees to pick up the flowers one by one. He did not see the truck backing toward him. Emily grabbed his shoulder and pulled him away just before the tire rolled over the spot where his hand had been. "Stay beside me. Do not run into the road." A cry came from the stall across the aisle. The elderly woman who ran the food stand had slipped while trying to avoid the table that had been pushed out of place. Emily abandoned the flowers being carried away by the rain and hurried over to help her sit up. She checked the woman's ankle. "Can you move it? Does your hip hurt?" "Your stand," the woman said breathlessly, looking toward the flowers lying in the mud. "The flowers can be arranged again. Someone who falls needs help first." On the Riverside Avenue, a black sedan was forced to stop because the crowd was partially blocking the road. Jonathan Harrison was reviewing a presentation for the waterfront redevelopment meeting when his attention shifted beyond the window. Through the rain, a woman was using her own raincoat to cover the boy beside her while she remained completely soaked. She bent down to help another vendor stand. That single profile was enough to make Jonathan forget what his assistant was saying. "Stop the car." "Sir, the meeting begins in 10 minutes. I said stop the car." Jonathan opened the door and stepped out. Rain quickly soaked through the shoulders of his expensive coat. He walked past the ruined flowers, never taking his eyes off the woman bending down to pick up a basket. 11 years had changed both of them. Emily was thinner. The lines on her face carried an exhaustion he had never seen in the young woman who once sat beside him in the university library. But when she looked up, those brown eyes brought every memory back intact. "Emily?" Her hand froze on the basket handle. Emily recognized Jonathan immediately. The man who had once promised to leave Portland with her on a train was now standing in the middle of the market his corporation was preparing to tear down. His coat was perfectly tailored. A private car waited behind him, and Charles's employees immediately stepped aside to clear his path. Emily turned away. "Noah, gather the flowers that are still clean. We are leaving." Jonathan took another step forward but did not try to stop her. "Emily, is that really you?" Harrison should ask his people why they came here before the hearing. Noah opened an old umbrella and tried to hold it high enough to cover his mother. As he raised his arm, his sleeve slipped back and revealed an old round-faced wristwatch with scratch glass. Jonathan saw the brown leather strap, the slightly crooked adjustment crown, and the small inscription engraved on the back. His breathing stopped for a moment. The watch had belonged to Jonathan's father. On his final night with Emily, Jonathan had taken it off his wrist and given it to her. He had told her that when he returned, he would personally place it on the wrist of the woman he married. That watch, Jonathan looked at Noah. "Where did you get it?" Noah covered the face of the watch with his hand, as though he was afraid Jonathan might take it back. "My mom has kept it since before I was born." Emily immediately lowered her son's hand. "Noah, help me pick the flowers." Only then did Charles step forward. The contempt on his face disappeared and was replaced by immediate respect. "Mr. Harrison, I did not know you would be inspecting the site personally. We are simply dealing with a non-compliant vendor. Miss Parker rejected a very generous compensation package and has repeatedly interfered with the project schedule. Jonathan looked at the notice on the post. Who authorized removal before the hearing? This is not technically a removal. We are only preparing the site according to the agreement that was signed. Emily turned back. I did not sign any agreement. Charles removed a copy from his briefcase and handed it to Jonathan. Beneath the compensation terms was a signature bearing the name Emily Parker. Jonathan did not reach a conclusion immediately. He looked at Emily, then at the neat, rigid handwriting on the page. Have you seen this document before? That is not my signature. Charles gave a faint laugh. Anyone who loses a large compensation payment can say that. Then let the legal department examine it, Jonathan replied. Charles stiffened slightly. There is no reason to delay the project over one denial. I did not ask whether the project needed to be delayed. The atmosphere around the flower stand changed. Vendors who had been keeping their heads down began to look up. Jonathan did not tell anyone what Emily had once meant to him. He did not ask her to get into his car for a private conversation. Instead, he bent down and picked up a bundle of white roses stained with mud. I will pay for the damage caused today, he said. That includes the merchandise and the cost of repairing the stand. Emily took the flowers from his hand but refused the business card he offered. You can buy every flower here, but you cannot buy the right to make me stay silent. I do not want you to stay silent. The project carrying your name is doing exactly that. The words made Jonathan look around. The torn tops, aging stools, and people shielding one another from the rain looked nothing like the description in Charles' reports of a declining commercial area that was nearly abandoned. This was still a functioning community. Noah gently pulled on Jonathan's sleeve. So you want to see what the market could look like? He took a sheet of paper folded into quarters from a waterproof pocket. It showed a drawing of a small plaza with covered walkways, accessible paths, trees, and market stalls arranged around a shared garden. You do not have to tear everything down, Noah explained. You only need to fix the drainage, raise the ground level, and keep trees in the center to hold the rainwater. Jonathan studied the angled notes along the edge of the page. The way Noah divided the space and marked movement routes resembled the sketches Jonathan himself had made in college. The boy was also left-handed. He rolled the pencil between his fingers before pointing at different sections, exactly the way Jonathan still did whenever he was thinking. Did you draw this yourself? Noah nodded. A dimple appeared in his left cheek. It was identical to Jonathan's in a childhood photograph displayed at the Harrison family estate. Emily took the drawing back. We need to close the stand. Jonathan looked at the boy with gray eyes standing beside her. He remembered the words, since before I was born, and suddenly asked, how old is Noah? This time, Emily did not avoid his eyes. 10. She pulled out the top and closed the flower stand between them before Jonathan could ask another question. That evening, inside their small apartment, Emily spread the dirty flowers across the kitchen table. She cut away the damaged stems, washed each flower carefully, then rearranged them into smaller bouquets. Noah looked at the torn petals. Nobody will pay for flowers like these, Mom. I am not selling them anymore. Tomorrow morning, you can help me take them to the hospital. People lying in those rooms still need something beautiful to look at. Helen was resting in the room at the back of the apartment. The sound of her coughing made Emily pause for a few seconds before she continued tying ribbon around a bundle of carnations. Noah sat across from his mother. Why did Mr. Harrison look at me like he had known me for a long time? He recognized the watch. Only because of the watch? Emily lowered her eyes and began choosing the petals that were still undamaged. You still have school tomorrow. Noah understood that it was not an answer. He removed the watch, studied the faded inscription on the back, then put it on again without asking anything else. In a high-rise apartment overlooking the Willamette River, Jonathan opened a wooden box he had carried through several moves. Inside was the train ticket for the trip he and Emily had never taken, several old photographs, and the warranty card for his father's watch. He enlarged a photograph of Noah standing in the rain that a field assistant had sent him. The serial number on the back of the watch matched the number on the warranty card. Jonathan's phone vibrated. Rachel Morgan was calling from headquarters. I checked Emily Parker's consent file. There is a problem. The signature? Not only the signature. The document says she signed in person in Portland on March 14th. But hospital records show that Emily was taking her mother to the emergency room in Oakland that day. The hospital admission time and the notarization time are only 17 minutes apart. Jonathan looked at the old train ticket. Emily's signature on the back was soft and slanted to the right. It looked nothing like the rigid signature on the consent form Charles had shown him. Rachel continued, "I recommend that you do not confront Charles yet. If this is systematic fraud, we need to know how many other documents were forged." Jonathan placed the warranty card beside Noah's photograph. The watch belonged to his father. The 10-year-old boy had his eyes, his dimple, and even the same way of drawing. And Emily had taken that keepsake with her when she left Jonathan 11 years earlier. If Noah was only 10 years old, why had Emily carried that watch away from Jonathan 11 years ago? The next morning, Jonathan returned to Riverside Market without an assistant, a driver, or an inspection team. He drove himself, wore a simple jacket, and carried a toolbox. Emily was standing on a chair, trying to secure the torn corner of the canopy. The river wind ripped the top out of her hands for the third time. Jonathan stepped forward and grabbed the other end of the rope. "Let me help? You should go back to your company and investigate your own people." "Rachel is doing that." Emily looked around. Several vendors had already recognized Jonathan. High local reporters were also standing across the street taking pictures of the flower stand. "If you keep showing up here, Charles will say I am using our past relationship to fight the project. If I walk away because I am afraid of what he might say about you, I will be repeating the same mistake that happened 11 years ago." Emily froze. "You still think I was the one who left? I received a letter saying you had fallen in love with someone else and were going to get married." Her grip tightened around the rope until her knuckles turned white. "I never wrote that letter." Another gust of wind struck. Jonathan held the wooden frame firmly while Emily tied the final knot. They stood close together beneath the repaired canopy, but 11 years still separated them. Jonathan looked toward Noah. The boy was sitting behind the stand, carefully repairing a broken price sign. "I need to know about Noah. He is my son." "I know that." "Then that is all you need to know for now." Emily, the watch. Do not question a child in the middle of a market as though he is an item in an investigation file. Jonathan stopped himself. He did not want to use his position to force her to answer, and he certainly did not want Noah to learn anything about his identity through an argument. One leg of the flower table was leaning to one side. Jonathan knelt to inspect it, and Noah walked over with a screwdriver. "Use this? The screw on the inside is stripped." Jonathan took it. "You know how to repair tables?" "No. But I know how to draw what needs to be fixed." Noah opened his notebook and pointed to a sketch of a new joint for the table leg. Jonathan laughed when he saw that the boy had even marked the dimensions and the load angle. "You should add a brace here." Noah rolled the pencil between the fingers of his left hand and drew a diagonal line. "Like this?" "Exactly." Within a few minutes, the two of them had forgotten their caution around each other. They repaired the table together, then leaned over Noah's drawing of the market with a garden and rainwater collection canopy. Emily watched her son laugh with Jonathan. The sight made something warm rise inside her, but it also filled her with unease. Noah had grown up without a father, and she had never seen him connect with a man so quickly. The watch on Noah's wrist slid down. He placed it on the edge of the paper to keep the wind from blowing the drawing away. "So you know who that watch used to belong to?" Jonathan asked. "Mom only said it belonged to someone who went very far away." Jonathan looked at Emily. She said nothing. He could have told Noah immediately that the watch had belonged to his grandfather. But the boy still had no idea that he might have any connection to the Harrison family. Jonathan put down the screwdriver. "Take good care of it. It is more important than you think." A car stopped outside the market. Rachel stepped out carrying a waterproof document folder. "I need to speak with you." She handed Jonathan a list of the consent forms that had been reviewed. At least 7 signatures show signs of irregularities. 3 had been written with the same type of ink and the same slant. One person was recorded as signing a document nearly 2 months after his death. Jonathan read every line again. "Stop all removal and demolition activity. Effective immediately." Rachel nodded. "I will send the internal order to Charles and every contractor." Charles received the notice in the project office less than an hour later. In front of Rachel, he remained calm. If the CAO wants a review, I will cooperate. But after Rachel left, Charles called a subcontractor who had not been included on the distribution list for the suspension order, moved the site preparation work under a subcontract code. Do not use the Harrison name on the vehicle schedule, but the suspension applies to the entire project. The order only applies to the parties who receive it. That afternoon, Rachel gave Charles an opportunity to explain himself before the formal audit began. She placed the 7 questionable signature files in front of him. If this was a management failure and you disclose it voluntarily, the board will evaluate your responsibility according to the actual circumstances. If you continue hiding things, the consequences will be different. Charles looked through every page, then pushed them back. A junior employee collected the signatures. I approved them based on his reports. That employee says you personally gave him the list. He is trying to save his job. Charles signed a false statement and placed all responsibility on an employee who had already been transferred. It was his first opportunity to stop. Instead, he chose to create another lie. At the market, Emily had just finished the first flower order since the storm when her phone rang. Helen had severe chest pain, difficulty breathing, and could not stand. Emily rushed back to the apartment and called emergency services, but she was told the ambulance would be delayed because several roads were flooded. Jonathan was still near the market reviewing vendor records. When he heard Noah calling for his mother in panic, he immediately brought his car to the entrance. "Do not waste time waiting. I will drive her to the hospital." Emily hesitated for only a second. Then she and Jonathan helped Helen into the car. Noah sat in the back and held his grandmother's hand. Jonathan chose higher roads, called the emergency department ahead of time, and got Helen to the hospital as quickly as possible. The doctor determined that she had suffered a mild heart attack. Helen was stabilized with medication and kept for observation. Inside the hospital room, Jonathan stood near the door to give Emily space beside her mother. Helen was still disoriented. She opened her eyes, recognized him, but seemed to believe she was living through a day from 11 years earlier. Jonathan has stepped closer. "I am here." Helen took his hand. "I am sorry. Emily's letters. They should have reached you." Emily froze. Jonathan looked at her. "What letters?" Helen became too weak to continue. Her hand fell away, and the nurse asked everyone to step outside so she could rest. In the hallway, rain tapped against the hospital windows. Jonathan turned toward Emily. "You sent letters to me?" "I sent many. I only received one. It said you had fallen in love with someone else and were getting married." Emily laughed, but there was no joy in it. "So now you want me to believe that every certified letter disappeared, but the one letter I never wrote somehow reached you? I never knew you sent certified letters. I sent them to the Harrison estate. Someone signed for them. I even sent one telling you I was pregnant." The anger on Jonathan's face disappeared. In its place was silent pain. "What did you just say?" Emily looked through the hospital room window. Noah was sitting at the far end of the hallway with his head lowered over his sketchbook. She lowered her voice. "This is not the place to talk about that. Is Noah my son?" Emily did not deny it. She only said, "A child is not evidence for 2 adults to use in a fight over who was right." Behind them, a pencil fell to the floor. Noah had walked closer without either of them noticing. He looked at his mother, then at Jonathan. "Whose child? You need to let me explain." Emily stepped toward him. Noah moved back. "Grandma said his name. He has the same watch as me. Now you are talking about being pregnant." His voice broke. "Did everyone know except me?" Noah turned and ran toward the stairwell. Emily was about to follow, but the doctor stepped out at that exact moment and asked her to sign the treatment authorization for Helen. Jonathan said, "Stay with your mother. I will find him." He did not call Noah his son. Jonathan found him back at Riverside Market beneath the canopy of the flower stand. Noah was sitting on the table they had repaired, holding his backpack against his chest. "Do not come any closer." Jonathan stopped several steps away. "All right, is my mother lying? You do not know the whole truth yet. Are you my father?" Jonathan needed several seconds before answering. "He just learned that I may have been denied a very important truth. But I will not claim anything before you and your mother are ready. Noah looked at him with red, tear-filled gray eyes. If you want the answer, you have to prove that my mother was not lying. I will. Not with money, with evidence. Noah gave the smallest nod, then turned his face away. Jonathan did not try to hug him. He sat down on a chair several steps away and waited quietly until Emily came to take Noah home. The next morning, Rachel found Samuel Reed, a retired mail carrier. He lived in a small suburban house where old records were stored by year inside carefully labeled boxes. I remember Miss Parker, Samuel said. She sent several certified letters to the Harrison estate and always requested that they be delivered directly to Jonathan. Did you ever meet Jonathan when you delivered them? Rachel asked. No. Mrs. Margaret's assistant accepted them. The procedure allowed an authorized representative to sign. Samuel opened a delivery ledger. Several lines contained Emily Parker's name and the same signature belonging to Margaret's assistant. He then removed another certified mail receipt. On the back was a note written in blue ink 10 years earlier. Sender is pregnant. Request personal delivery to Jonathan Harrison. Refused. Jonathan read the sentence and tightened his grip on the edge of the paper. Samuel slowly stood and took a metal box from a cabinet. The receipt is not the only thing I kept. Inside was a yellowed envelope that was still sealed. Jonathan Harrison's name was written on the front. The back was stamped. Recipient refused. And beneath it was a rough signature that looked nothing like Jonathan's handwriting. Samuel said, "It was returned to the post office. I planned to return it to Miss Emily, but when I went to her old address, she had already moved away. I kept it because something about it never felt right." Rachel called Emily. Inside Samuel's small room, Jonathan placed the envelope in front of her. "I have never seen this." Emily recognized her own handwriting. Her lips trembled. Jonathan did not open the letter without permission. He asked, "May I read it?" After a long silence, Emily nodded. He carefully opened the edge of the envelope. Inside was a letter that had remained untouched for more than a decade. Jonathan read the first line, his voice tightening with emotion. "John, I do not know whether you will forgive me, but you are going to have a child." Nobody in the room spoke. Someone had signed Jonathan's name on the envelope to refuse the letter telling him that he was going to become a father. If Jonathan had never refused that letter, then who had signed his name to send it back? The letter lay between Jonathan and Emily like a witness that had remained silent for 11 years. Jonathan read the first line again, then looked at the refusal signature on the envelope. The handwriting looked nothing like his signature on any contract or document. Emily stood across from him with both hands clenched. She no longer knew whether she should grieve for the past or feel hope because he had finally seen what she had once tried so desperately to tell him. Jonathan folded the letter and placed it inside the protective sleeve Rachel had prepared. "I will find out who signed my name." Emily looked at him. "Finding the truth will not give back the years Noah grew up without a father." "I know." "No, Jonathan, you are only beginning to understand." The next morning, Jonathan went to the Harrison estate. Margaret was sitting in the living room with an untouched tea service in front of her. When she saw the envelope and the certified mail receipt, her expression changed, but her voice remained calm. "Where did you find those? Is that more important than the fact that they exist?" Margaret set down her teacup. "I met Emily back then. I am not denying that. Did you receive the letters she sent?" The family assistant handed the mail. "Do not hide behind an assistant." Jonathan placed the receipt on the table. "Emily clearly wrote that she was pregnant. Someone working for you refused to deliver the letter directly to me." Margaret stood and walked toward the window. At the time, the family was in crisis. The company was close to insolvency. You were preparing to abandon every responsibility. You had to run away with a girl who had nothing but dreams. She was carrying my child. Margaret did not turn around. Jonathan continued, "You knew about the child, did you not?" Emily's father was about to be investigated for financial misconduct. Her entire family could have lost their home. Emily chose to leave. A choice made under threat is not a choice. Margaret remained silent. "Why did you block information about an innocent child?" "I did what was necessary to protect your future." "No. You decided my future for me." This was Margaret's opportunity to tell the entire truth. Instead, she closed the curtains. Leave the past behind, Jonathan. If this becomes public, the press will turn Emily and the boy into targets. The company will also be dragged into a scandal that died a long time ago. The past is not dead. It is standing in the rain protecting a flower stand from a project carrying my name. Jonathan left the estate with the painful certainty that his mother was still hiding the most serious part of the truth. At the hospital, Helen was more alert. She asked Emily to take a cloth bag from the cabinet. Inside was an old pressed flower journal with an unusually thick cover. With trembling hands, Helen pulled back the fabric lining. A yellowed agreement fell onto the bed. Emily read every line. The document required her to leave Portland and all contact with Jonathan and never disclose her meeting with Margaret. In exchange, the Harrison family would not pursue criminal charges against her father. At the bottom were the signatures of Emily and Margaret Harrison. You kept this all these years? Helen turned her face away. Your father said he did not take the money, but we had no attorney, no money, and nobody willing to believe us. I told you to sign because I was afraid he would be arrested. I was afraid the bank would take the house. And then you hid this document. I was afraid that if you went back looking for Jonathan, they would hurt our family again. Emily sat beside the bed. The pain inside her did not disappear, but she did not place all the blame on her sick mother. You let fear make decisions for too long. Helen began to cry. I'm sorry. Emily placed the agreement inside a protective sleeve, then took her mother's hand. An apology cannot change the past, but telling the truth now still matters. Rachel sent the breakup letter Jonathan had received to a handwriting expert. The signature had been imitated from older examples of Emily's handwriting, but the connections between the letters lacked natural movement. The ink used in the body of the letter and the ink used in the signature were also applied at different times. The conclusion was clear. Emily had not written the letter. When Jonathan brought the report to the market, Emily was arranging potted flowers with branches damaged by the storm. Noah stood nearby but did not join the conversation. Jonathan placed the report in front of her. I believe you. Emily looked at the handwriting analysis. You believe me because an expert confirmed it. Yes. 11 years ago, I should have looked for you and asked you myself instead of believing a convenient letter. Jonathan turned toward Noah. I want to request a DNA test, but only if you agree. The result will remain private. No company, reporter, or family member will be allowed to release it without your permission. Noah rolled the pencil between his fingers. What happens if the result says you are my father? I will still have to learn how to be present in your life. A test can tell you that you are my father. Noah looked directly at Jonathan. It cannot automatically make you my dad. Jonathan nodded. You are right. Noah looked at his mother. This time, Emily did not make the decision for him. I want to know, he said. The samples were collected privately at an independent medical facility. Rachel prepared a confidentiality agreement requiring that the results be released only to Emily, Noah, and Jonathan. While they waited, Charles discovered that the audit had reached payments involving the shell company. He understood that the project's suspension was no longer a temporary obstacle. An anonymous article appeared on a local news site accusing Emily of inventing a story about her son in order to claim a millionaire's wealth. Reporters descended on the market, pointed cameras at Noah, and asked whether he was the secret heir. Emily pulled her son inside the stand and closed the tap. Nobody records a child without permission. Customers began avoiding the market. Flower orders were cancelled. Some vendors feared that the media attention would cause them to lose their permits. But Charles was not finished. His people broke into the cooperative office during the night and removed a box containing land use records. Afterward, confidential Harrison development documents were planted in the storage area behind Emily's flower stand. The next morning, company security arrived after an anonymous tip. Rachel demanded that the entire process be recorded and that Luis Ortega be present as a witness. When the box was opened, internal company documents were lying directly on top of the flower wrapping supplies. Charles spoke in front of the camera. Miss Parker stole corporate records to sabotage the project and is using her personal relationship with the CAO to avoid responsibility. Emily did not touch the documents. I have never seen those, Charles smiled. You deny every signature and every document that works against you. Rachel noticed that the cooperative records box was missing. Planting the corporate documents had not only been an attempt to frame Emily. Someone was searching for something more important. That evening, a contractor employee approached Charles. The hearing is only 1 day away. There are children and elderly people in the market. We should wait for an official order. Charles scheduled the demolition for dawn. If the market is no longer operating when the hearing begins, they will have nothing left to protect. It was his second opportunity to stop. Instead, Charles ordered the power shut off before the excavators arrived. Rachel finally discovered the real target inside the city archives. A land use addendum stated that Riverside Market was protected as long as the cooperative maintained continuous operation. The land could not be converted to commercial development without lawful consent from the cooperative members. Parker Bloom sat on the central parcel that Emily's father had left to her. If the stand was destroyed before the hearing, Charles could claim that the cooperative's continuous operation had been interrupted. After hearing this, Louis locked his shoe repair shop and removed a copy of the addendum from his safe. Emily's father asked me to keep this. He said it should never be stored with the main records. The document carried the county's seal. But Rachel needed the original registered copy to request an emergency order stopping the demolition. Samuel read the addendum and remembered something. Emily's father once sent a letter mentioning a deposit box at the old post office. He said the key was hidden inside something that time could never erase. Everyone looked at the watch on Noah's wrist. Jonathan examined the back. Beneath the repair cover was a narrow compartment. When they opened it, they found a thin key marked with the number 317. At the old post office, the key opened deposit box number 318. Inside was the original registered copy of the land use addendum, the cooperative meeting records, and the list of the actual compensation amounts approved by the corporation. The real compensation was far higher than the amounts Charles had told the vendors they would receive. The difference had been routed through a company whose address matched the law office of Charles's brother-in-law. Rachel digitized every page, documented the source and chain of custody, then began preparing an emergency court request. Her phone received another notification. The DNA results were ready, but Rachel did not open them. She sealed the electronic notice according to the confidentiality agreement and waited for Emily and Noah to decide when they wanted to see it. Before Rachel could file the emergency request, the entire market lost power. The sound of diesel engines came from the end of the street. Noah woke in the room above the flower stand and shook his mother awake. Outside in the rain, tow excavators were moving toward Riverside earlier than the announced schedule. Charles stood beside the demolition crew and watched Emily step outside. When the courthouse opens, this flower stand will already be gone. Would Jonathan arrive in time to protect the market? Or would Emily lose everything for the second time in her life beneath the Harrison name? The excavator engines roared through the rain as the steel bucket slowly lowered toward Parker Bloom's. Emily stood in front of the buckets of rain-soaked flowers, gripping a copy of her complaint in both hands. Beside her, Louis and the other vendors formed a silent line. Nobody threw stones. Nobody fought back. They simply stood there, placing their own bodies between the machinery and the market that had supported generations of families. Emily raised her voice clearly above the rain. The hearing begins in a few hours. We are asking you to wait for the court's decision. Charles stepped out of the black car, his raincoat untouched by mud. He looked at the line of people in front of him as though they were nothing more than an obstacle that needed to be removed. The land use rights for this property have expired. You are illegally occupying private property. He pointed at Emily, and she hid confidential Harrison documents inside her flower stand. Now she is inventing a story about a child to extort money. The reporters immediately raised their cameras. Noah stood beneath the canopy behind his mother, his face turning pale. Charles saw him and deliberately raised his voice. A fatherless child being used to extract money cannot change property ownership. Emily had just stepped forward when a vehicle sped through the market entrance and stopped hard in front of the excavator. Jonathan opened the door and ran straight into the rain. Hare did not look at Charles. Hare moved between the steel bucket and the flower stand, then raised one hand toward the operator. I am Jonathan Harrison, CAO of Harrison Urban Development. Nobody moves another 3 feet or about 1 meter. Charles froze. John, you do not understand the situation. She has. I understand that this project carries the Harrison name. Jonathan turned toward the cameras. So before anyone else is held accountable, I need to accept responsibility for approving this project based on reports I failed to verify. Then he looked directly at Charles. Do not call that boy fatherless. If someone has been absent from his life, that person is me. Not because his mother lied, but because her letters were never allowed to reach me. Rain ran down Jonathan's face. Noah stepped out from beneath the canopy. He did not call Jonathan his father. He did not run toward him. He simply stood beside Emily and wrapped his small hand around hers. But for the first time, the way he looked at Jonathan was no longer filled entirely with suspicion. A car horn sounded outside the gate. Rachel stepped out with 2 court officers. An emergency stay has been issued. She raised the document bearing the official seal. All demolition activity must stop immediately until the court reviews the evidence. The excavator operator shut down the engine. Silence spread across the market, leaving only the sound of rain striking the metal roofs. Rachel opened her waterproof case and removed the land use addendum discovered inside deposit box number 317. The original document confirms that the market remains protected as long as the cooperative maintains continuous operation. Destroying Parker blooms before the hearing would create an artificial condition that could then be used to claim that the protection had expired. C placed the actual compensation records beside the payment schedule Charles had previously shown the vendors. The differences were clearly visible in front of the cameras. The money withheld from the vendors was routed through a shell company. Financial records show that Charles Whitman has an indirect financial interest in that company through his brother-in-law. Charles stepped backward. This is defamation. Those documents were stolen. Then you should explain that to the investigators. Rachel played an audio recording. Charles's voice came through the small speaker, ordering the contractor to demolish the market before the courthouse opened so the cooperative's continuous operation requirement would be broken. The worker who had recorded the order stepped out from the crowd and confirmed the time and place of the conversation. Moments later, Samuel Reed appeared carrying an old bag of postal records. Hare produced the delivery ledger and the receipt bearing the signature of Margaret's assistant. I delivered the letters Emily sent to Jonathan. The Harrison household office was the actual recipient. The final letter was returned with a refusal signature under Jonathan's name, but that signature was not his. Rachel presented the handwriting analysis. The refusal signature had been forged. The breakup letter had also been written and signed with inks applied at different times. A story that had survived for 11 years began collapsing in front of the public. Rachel turned toward Emily and Noah. Only after both of them nodded did she speak. With the consent of Emily Parker and Noah Parker, I can confirm that the DNA test shows Jonathan Harrison is Noah's biological father. Nobody applauded. Jonathan did not step forward and demand to hug him. He only lowered his head slightly, accepting a truth that felt both like a gift and a sentence for all the years that had been lost. Another vehicle stopped outside the market. Margaret Harrison stepped out without an umbrella. She looked at her son, then at Emily, then at Noah wearing the watch that had belonged to her late husband. Jonathan spoke. This is your final opportunity to tell the truth. Margaret closed her eyes for several seconds. I was the one who forced Emily to leave Portland. I used the investigation against her father to pressure her into signing the agreement. I blocked her letters, had someone forge Jonathan's signature, and created the breakup letter. Her voice grew rough. Emily never asked for money. She never threatened the Harrison family. I did all of it because I believed I was protecting my son's future. Jonathan did not protect his mother from the consequences. You need to resign from the board, surrender every related record, and cooperate with the investigation. Starting today, you are not to contact Noah privately without Emily's permission. Margaret looked at her grandson, but did not move toward him. For the first time, she respected a boundary, even though it caused her pain. Police officers and financial investigators arrived soon afterward. Charles was taken in as part of an investigation involving document forgery, fraud, witness intimidation, and violation of the emergency stay. As he passed the flower stand, he still tried calling Jonathan's name. Jonathan did not turn around. In front of the vendors, Jonathan lowered his head and apologized. "He allowed my authority to be used against people who did not have the resources to protect themselves. An apology does not repair that damage, so I will remove myself from every vote involving compensation and allow an independent council to make those decisions." That council was later made up of vendor representatives, city officials, and independent legal experts. The market's land use rights were transferred into a long-term community trust, preventing any private company from unilaterally eliminating them. Families that had previously been forced out were compensated for their losses and given priority to return. The money Charles had diverted from the compensation fund was recovered through legal proceedings. Emily was offered a large personal settlement, but she accepted only the amount corresponding to her actual losses. Use the rest to restore the market and replace the income lost by families who were forced out. I do not want justice to stop at the entrance to my flower stand. A community garden was built beside the river and named after Emily's father. A small plaque recognized that the man who had once been used as leverage against his family had not been a criminal. He had been a father trying to protect his family while he had very little power. Jonathan did not ask Noah to change his last name. He did not file for custody. He and Emily attended family counseling and allowed Noah to decide the pace of the relationship. Jonathan showed up for Noah's design competition. He spent hours helping him build neighborhood models out of cardboard, and he only drove Helen to medical appointments when Emily agreed. Those small acts could never replace 10 years of absence. But day by day, they gave weight to Jonathan's promises. Margaret sent an apology. Emily did not forgive her immediately. Remorse is not proven by tears. It is proven by whether you respect our boundaries after this. Margaret lowered her head and accepted that. Months later, Riverside Market reopened beneath strings of warm yellow lights. At the entrance stood a sign designed by Noah. "Things we thought were lost can still bloom again." Jonathan came to Parker Blooms and chose a small bouquet. He placed money on the counter, but Emily handed back the extra. "There is no special millionaire prize here." Jonathan smiled and accepted the exact change. "Then may I invite you and Noah to dinner tonight?" Emily looked at the man who had once been her first love and was now learning how to become a father. "I am not promising marriage or a fairy tale ending, but we can start slowly, with truth and equality." Noah ran over and placed a drawing in Jonathan's hand. It showed a house with 3 people standing in front of the door. There was no Harrison name or Parker name written across the roof. "I still do not know what name I should put here." Jonathan knelt until he was at eye level with him. "We do not have to decide today." Emily looked at the two of them beneath the lights of the market that had come back to life. Then she said softly, "Not everything returns to the way it was. Sometimes we have to plan everything again from the beginning, but this time in the soil of truth."